Now, chapter 15 deals with property management and leasing. It's a pretty easy chapter. I'm sure a lot of us dealt with leases, so I want to go over this with you, though. In the first paragraph, you can highlight, it states that in addition to leasing, managing, marketing, and overall maintenance of real estate owned by others, it's expected that a property manager function as a market analyst, residential leasing agent, accountant, advertising specialist, and maintenance person all at the same time. In addition, the property manager interacts with the people in various professions, lawyers, environmental engineers, accountants, etc. Now, the property manager has three principal responsibilities. You can highlight, put an X by the next three bullets. The first bullet, achieve the objectives of the property owners, which is the next two bullets, generate income for the owners and preserve or increase the value of the investment property. Now, in order to manage property for someone else, you must have a managing broker's license. There's an exemption to that. If you live in a building that you manage, you don't have to be licensed. Or if you own the building yourself, you don't have to be licensed. Otherwise, you must have a managing broker's license. Now, you, as a broker, once you get licensed, you can lease property out to people, whether it's commercial or industrial or residential, that's fine. But you can't manage property for someone else unless you have a managing broker's license. I have a question here. Will a broker be able to detect a redlining situation right away? If so, who do you report it to? I don't know if you could detect it right away. Redlining does go on. I would report it to your sponsor, document it with your sponsoring broker. That's what I want you to do. Redlining is a lot more common with car dealerships more than anything else. I know there's been a lot of cases. There was a case about, well, this happened maybe close to 10 years ago, maybe 7, 8 years ago on the far south side. There was a car dealership on, it was on Vincennes, but I can't remember. It was on 111th or 119th or something like that. I can't remember exactly which one it was. And Chrysler, I know it's a Chrysler dealership. And anyone that bought a car from them, they charge a much higher interest rate than anywhere else in the Chicagoland area because the area is predominantly African American. And they repossess your car. I don't know exactly how long. I don't know if it's 60 days or 90 days. I don't know what the number is, but they would repossess a car if they were 30 days behind on the payments. Only in that particular car dealership. They shut down, but they opened up 4 blocks away under a new name or something like that. That's what they did. How do you become a licensed managing broker? That's going to be covered in chapter 6. You need a managing broker's license to manage property for others. You need a managing broker's license if you want to manage property, manage office for a sponsoring broker. Or if you want to be a sponsoring broker, you need a managing broker's license. You had to take additional courses, and you had to be licensed as a broker for 2 years before you could go for your managing broker's license. But all the details I'm going to cover on Wednesday in chapter 16, exactly what you need to do. Now, let's skip down to, let's go to the next page. Actually, I don't know if anything on this page I need. No, let's go on to I'm losing my spot. Hold on a second. Okay, so let's go to page 317, I believe. Let me just double check. Nope, not 317. Let's go to page 318 now. The second paragraph you can highlight. Well, I'm going to talk more about this in chapter 16, but there's a license called a residential leasing agent that just allows that person to lease residential property. They have to work for a sponsoring broker as well. Now, the management plan and agreement, highlight, put an X by that. The first step in taking over the management of property for someone else is come up with a management plan. Now, some of the things that are going to be included in preparing a management plan, property manager analyzes 3 factors. You got highlight, put an X by these 3 bullets. The owner's objective, which is to make money and preserve the integrity of the property. Second bullet, the regional and neighborhood market. And the third one is the property itself, the specific property. Now, the second step in taking over the management of a property, 2 paragraphs down, is enter into a management agreement. Highlight, put an X by that. By entering into a management agreement, both the property manager and the owner, they know what to expect out of each other. Well, the property owner will know what to expect out of the property manager. Now, some of the things that should be included in the management agreement, there's a set of bullets at the bottom of this page. There's more on the next page. Go over those on your own. Now, after the set of bullets, property manager's responsibility. Highlight, put X by the next paragraph. Financial reports. One of the primary responsibility of a property manager is maintaining the financial reports, including operating budget, cash flow reports, etc. Highlight, put an X by operating budget. Now, a good property manager should prepare a operating budget. This is going to be based on anticipated income and expenses. They usually would do a 1-year projection, 3-year, 5-year, and even a 10-year projection on what they could expect. Now, income, highlight, put an X by that. Income will include the rents. It will include like vending machines, like laundry machines, any storage, parking fees, all that is income. Then they highlight, put X by the next paragraph, expenses. Expenses of running this building, which will include like all the expenses, the taxes, the utilities, the repairs, the maintenance, scavenger, all those are the expenses. Now, let's go on to page 320. Renting the property, setting rental rates. Highlight, put an X by that paragraph. Rental rates are influenced primarily by supply and demand. A good property manager should know exactly what similar apartments are renting for in the area. They should conduct a survey. They should go on Craigslist. They should walk the neighborhood, because a lot of times they only post on the doors of what's available. They got to know what their competition is. What are similar size apartments and square footage and bedrooms are renting for in the area. Now, after the set of bullets, the second paragraph, it says a elevated level of vacancy may indicate poor management or defective or undesirable property. On the other hand, a high occupancy rate means that the rents are too low. If you own a 100-unit building and I'm your manager, and I've been managing this building, let's say for the last 10 years, and I never had a vacancy, well, that means there's a problem there. You are expected to have vacancies. The only reason I don't have a vacancy, my rents are too low. That's a bad property manager if you never have any vacancies. Collecting rents, highlight, put an X by that one. I got a question here. Question is, why do we have to know about rentals? Is that a part of our responsibilities? Well, generally it's not, but since it's on a state exam, you do need to know it. I don't know if I told you, I thought I mentioned this on the first day. I don't know if I did to this class. About, I'd say close to 95% of everything that we've been covering so far and what we're going to continue to next Wednesday and next Monday about 95% of it you would never ever use in the real estate business, never. But everything I am talking about, what I have talked about so far, and what I continue to talk about, will be on a state exam. All I'm doing here is preparing you for the state exam. That's it. Okay. No. I mean, I just want you to know. Yeah. Are you going to be doing this? Probably not. Is it on a state exam? Oh, yeah. Sure is. So, um, collecting rents. A property manager should make sure that he only accept those tenants who can meet their monthly financial obligations. They have to make sure that they do make sure that they have a job. Um, you should check references, interview the former landlord, not the current landlord, the former landlord. Because if it's a bad tenant, the current landlord might say anything, just get rid of that tenant. I've been a landlord for at least 40 years, over 40 years. I had a lot of buildings I used to manage and run myself. And um, I don't know, I was thinking about writing a book. I mean, I have seen everything, anything you can imagine, I have seen as a manager. I think I am going to write a book. I'm going to call it, So You Want to Be a Property Manager? You got to be whacked in the head. You really do. Um, I found dead body, not dead bodies. I found a dead person. One of my tenants died. I had to go through a couple evictions. They were awful too, to do that. I had one guy that I had a situation once. Now, I had a couple buildings that I owned with friends of mine. They were Chicago policemen. It's a good person to have as a partner, believe me. I know sometimes policemen bend the rules a little bit. I do respect policemen for the job that they do, but I owned this building once, and here's what happened. This is years ago, and me and my partner, we had about 3 buildings together. He was a Chicago cop, and one situation happened where I went to pick up the rents. At that time, that's what I was doing myself, and it's on the 4th floor, this apartment. So I went there to pick up the rent, and one of my tenants moved out and my tenant rented the apartment to another tenant. And so I went there to pick up the rent. I see this guy there, a young guy. I says, I'm looking for the tenant, Russ or whatever the guy's name was. He says, oh, he moved out. And he said I could have this apartment. He doesn't own this building. I own the building. If you want to stay here, I need an application. I need security deposit. I need rent. He says, I have no money. I says, you need to get out of here. Here's what he tells me. I have only known him for about 20 seconds. Here's what he told me. I could stay here for the next 10 to 12 months. I don't have to pay you a dime's rent, and there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. That's what this guy told me, knowing him only 20 seconds. So what I did is I call up my partner. He's one district away, one police district away. So he was working. I call him up. I go, Kenny, I got a problem. You got to come over to the building. So he came over right away. He's in a squad car because he took a personal. He came over. He came with his partner too, his police partner. And I'm like 5'6", maybe almost. My partner Kenny is 6'4". So he's in uniform. He comes out. He comes with his partner. His partner's a big guy too. I don't. Okay, I got to tell you a little bit about my real estate partner's police partner. They called this cop cockeyed because his eyes, they went different directions. One looked this way, one looked that way. When I used to talk to him, to cockeyed, first of all, I don't know how this guy qualified on the range, because you have to qualify a couple times a year. You have to qualify as shooting on a range and stuff. And his eyes are going in different directions. One's going up to the left, one's going down to the right. When I talk to this guy, I don't even know. My head's going like this, looking at. I don't know which eye he has on me. I don't know if to look on the bridge of his nose. When I'm talking to him, I think he's looking at something behind me. I kept turning around. What are you looking at? Because I'm talking to you. I'm looking at you. I go, how can anyone tell? This cockeyed. This guy was, that's his nickname, was cockeyed. Again, I don't know how he qualified for the range. Well, Kenny and Cockeye showed up. Again, we're on the fourth floor unit. I told him what happened. He says, don't worry, we'll take care of it. So they knock on the door. I'm standing behind him, but the guy can't see me. The tenant, he opens the door. Hey, officers, hey, come on in, come on in. They come in, and well, I'll tell you what I heard Kenny tell him. Okay, this is what I heard. It would be nice, sir, if you can vacate the premises. That's what it sounded like to me. Here's what the guy says. What are you going to do if I don't leave? Kenny says, I'm going to make a promise to you. Here's my promise. So I'm going to be back here tomorrow. I'm going to be here at 12 noon. And here's my promise. I guarantee you this. If you're still in this apartment, I'm going to pick you up. I'm going to throw you right out through that window. And after I throw you out the window, I'm going to pick up your wife and I'm going to throw her out the window right after you. That's all he said. He turned around and they walked away. We came back the next day at 12 noon. Guess what? They were gone. See, we call that speedy eviction. I don't know how people get to act. Well, he thought he was going to be there for 10 or 12 months. He wasn't even there for one day. Speedy eviction. That's why it's good. Oh, Berto, I bet you got a lot of tons. I got tons of stories too. You know, tons of them. Some of them are bad too. So, going on, let's see. Let me, I need to write down something for you. Something that, I'm going to write down two things. And not that you're going to see both of these, but I'm sure you're going to see one of these things. Okay. So write these both down. I don't know which one you're going to see. So a property manager is not responsible for filing income tax returns for the owner. A property manager is not responsible for filing income tax returns for the owner. Just because the property manager collects the rents and he pays the bills, the owner's responsible for filing their own income taxes. And the other thing I want you to know, a property manager cannot make money at the expense of the owner. A property manager cannot make money at the expense of the owner. So let's say you own a 200-unit apartment building. You hired me to be your property manager. First thing I do, I go to a local hardware store and says, look, I'm managing this building down the block from you. I'm gonna run all my cleaning supplies, my paints, my windows, my locks, whatever I need. You know, I mean, not windows, but glass or whatever I need to maintain this building. So it's a lot of business you're going to get. I don't care if you jack up the price on everything. I want a kickback on everything. Otherwise, I'm not going to give you the business. I'm going to give it to someone else. Cannot make money at the expense of the owner. Okay. Be familiar with both those things I just wrote down. Now, Um, let's skip down to, okay, the last paragraph on page 320 continues on page 321. So highlight, put an X by it. Now, there's a law here in Illinois that if you own more than 25 residential units, doesn't have to be in the same building, be spread out all throughout the state in several different buildings. If you own more than 25 residential units and you are holding security deposit, the owner must pay interest on a security deposit once a year if they live there for 6 months. If they don't, they could get fined up to 3 times the rental. This is, just want to let you know, this law that they passed is the biggest pain in the ass since the beginning of time. So if I'm renting an apartment for you for $2,000 security deposit, the interest on that will add up to about 25 cents at the most, probably less than that, less than probably about 20 cents a year. But if I don't pay that tenant that 20 cents a year, I could get fined to 3 times 2,000, which is $6,000. It's a dumb law that they passed. Some lawyers saying, "Oh my God, look all the money that these landlords are making on interest on a security deposit." No, we gotta get that money back. Well, guess what? Landlords have gotten away from having security deposit. Now what they're doing is charging a non-refundable move-in fee. Non-refundable move-in fee, which started off being $200-300. Now it's up to $700, $800, $900. They don't get that money back. So instead of them making a few pennies, now they're losing almost $1,000, 25 units or more. This next paragraph, highlight, put an X by, maintaining good relations with tenants. Very important for a property manager or building owner to have a good relationship with their tenants. One way of having a good relationship, you have a good communication system with your tenants. Let me tell you something about tenants. I'll tell you why tenants move out. It's not because you raise the rent, because tenants understand, costs go up. Taxes and costs, they understand that. They know because their friends are renting and they know what apartments should be renting for. The reason why they move out of your building is the little things you said you're going to do that you don't do. The doorbell has not worked in 4 months. Every time they flush a toilet, they got to jiggle the handle to stop the water from running. They turn on the light in the hallway outside the bedroom, but the switch went bad and the light's burning 24 hours a day. It's the little things that you don't do. You got to either take care of things yourself, you got to have a good management company to send the maintenance people to take care of these little things. That's what's important to tenants. I'm telling you, take care of them. Skip down a couple next paragraph. Property manager must be able to handle residents who do not pay the rent on time or break building regulations. Now, of course, tenants are entitled to have parties once in a while because of, it could be an anniversary, a birthday, a graduation, something like that. They just can't be partying all the time. So let me tell you this, and this is important because I want to talk about something with you. One of my agents in my own office, he lives in a 2-flat building. He lives on the first floor, and the owner rented the second floor to other tenants. And since those tenants moved in, my agent came up to me. He goes, "Sam, I don't know what to do. I had the landlord rented the second floor to a bunch of tenants, and they lived there for 6 months, and they're partying every single night, all night long to 4 or 5 in the morning. I can't get any sleep or anything else." I says, "You got to tell your landlord." I did tell my landlord. He said there's nothing he can do. Why? Because these are Section 8 tenants. And then they could do whatever they want, and the landlord cannot do anything about it. I says, "Let me tell you something. You're nuts and your landlord's nuts too." I want to take a moment. I want to explain about Section 8 to all of you because I'm going to tell you something very important for your career. Now, first of all, Section 8 is subsidized housing by HUD, where they pay a majority of the rent is based on a person's income. They pay a portion of it. Now, HUD will pay fair market value, or even on the average, slightly higher than fair market value. Now, what I need you to know, that once you're in a business, if an owner of a building says, I want you to rent apartments for me, that's fine. You could do that, do a listing agreement. We put in a multiple listing, that's fine. But if the landlord says no Section 8 tenants, you cannot take that listing. It is against the law, federal law, only in Cook County. Anywhere else outside of Cook County, you can say no Section 8, but in Cook County, you cannot say no Section 8 tenants. And I want to tell you what happened. Let's go back 20 years ago. You have a brand new apartment, you rent to a Section 8 tenant, and they destroyed the apartment. HUD would withhold the rent till you fix up the apartment brand new again. Now you got a brand new apartment, the tenant destroys it the next day. HUD would withhold the rent till you fix it up again. Doesn't work that way. I don't know if you know anyone that works with Section 8 tenants now. Section 8 tenants are the best tenants you could ever get. Because here's what happens. HUD comes in there and they do a complete inspection of the property. I mean, it's pages and pages of long. They take dozens of pictures of everything, and the apartment has to be in perfect shape. Now, if something gets broken by the tenant, no matter what it is, if the tenant destroys something, the tenant gets kicked off of Section 8. They lose that subsidy. And the waiting list is right now, it's about 7 to 8 years to get back on it. I want to tell you something. Section 8 tenants, they do not want to get off. They're not going to destroy anything on that property because they know if they get kicked off, they're not going to get back on. They can't get back on. It's over 8-year waiting list, I've heard. So the inspection is really hard. Yes, they're very, very tough. You cannot have a loose doorknob. You can't have a cracked window pane, a cracked ceramic tile, or anything else like that. The inspection is very hard, but let me tell you, the money's good. It is about a 100-page manual. I know that. So, do they pay for damages? I don't think they do. Oh, someone says, yep. Even what would normally be the worst tenants, they are on Section 8. They are good tenants. You are absolutely right. Anyone I know of, no, they will not pay for damages. Someone told me that. But anyone I know of that rent to Section 8 tenants, they are the best tenants there is. And the money's always there. So, so be careful. You cannot take a listing in Illinois or in Cook County, I should say Cook County. The property is located in Cook County, and say no Section 8. Cannot do that. Okay, I want you to know that. You know, I had Chicago Housing Authority come into my office to talk about exactly what they do. They pay. I mean, they're really good. Let's say a tenant has to pay their share. They can't miss that. They have to pay their share. Now, if a tenant gets sick and they're not working, or they get laid off because of COVID or something, HUD will pick up everything. That's what they do. I mean, when they come in there, I do training in my office, but I bring outside speakers, and HUD was very, very good over there. It worked out real good. Someone says, I used to live in an apartment building with at least 25 units. They used to send us checks in the mail for interest on the security deposit, then suddenly stopped. I was living there for nearly 15 years. I asked the management, why did the check stop coming? He said, they don't do it anymore. Can management do that? Well, here's the thing, Shanice. They gotta have 25 units that they're holding security deposit. If they're holding security deposit for less than 25, they don't have to pay interest. So I don't know the exact situation, but that's the only reason. Otherwise, no, they do have to pay. They have to pay in Illinois. So. Um, I think interest is based on some number. It's 25. It's 25 units or more. Chicago, it's different though. So someone asked me, do I offer mentorship? Well, I do offer that at my office, but most of my agents call it tormentorship. I torment them more than anything else. I'd like to interview with you about my office, all of you. I'll talk to you about that later. I have a great training program. I help my agents get productive right away, but I'll talk to you about that a week from today, our last day. Okay, let's skip down a couple of paragraphs. Where it says, starts off with a primary maintenance objective. That one line, I want you to highlight because it's something you see as an answer to a test question. The primary maintenance objective is to protect the physical integrity of the property over the long term. That is an answer to a test question. For example, preserving the property by repainting the exterior or replacing the heating systems help decrease long-term maintenance costs. Keeping property in good condition involves following 4 types of maintenance. You can highlight and put X's by these 4. The first one is called preventive maintenance. Now, preventive maintenance is this. In September, you bring your heating guy to come in and tune up your boiler for your building. Make sure the water levels are good, whatever chemicals you need in there. You go up on the roof in the fall. You check for those little hairline cracks, which you can patch up with a bucket of tar. But except if you ignore those hairline cracks in the fall, they turn into big gaps in the middle of the winter. Now you have a big problem. Repair and corrective maintenance. Now I've seen this on a state exam. A leaky faucet is a repair and corrective maintenance problem. A leaky faucet, saw that in the state exam. Another repair or corrective maintenance issue will be when the furnace conks out. Do you know when a furnace conks out? In the city of Chicagoland, in the Chicagoland area, let me tell you when a furnace conks out. The coldest day of the year. Try getting a heating guy out there on the coldest day of the year. Your furnace conks out on that cold day. You call up a heating company, boiler company. Hey, my boiler went out. And they'll say to you that, look, they ask for how many floors and how many square feet. That says, yeah, you know what? We can replace it. It's going to cost you $25,000. We want the money in cash. I don't have the cash. I don't have $25,000 in cash. Tell you what, why don't you give us a call when you get the money? And then they hang up. So many times they replace boilers and they didn't get paid for it. So that's why I said you got to have money reserved in case something like that happens. I had a boiler in a big building, and I had a commercial building. It was apartments and actually I had offices in the front. I have machinery company in the back. And what happened was the boiler went out on New Year's Eve. I had the tubes, they're called tubes, that are in the boiler that were leaking. And they had to replace the tubes, except that this is New Year's Eve. This is 8 o'clock at night. I called my heating guy, and he lives in Antioch, and he does all my stuff. He goes, Sam, I'm not coming out there tonight. So what am I going to do? He says, you got to stop the tubes from leaking, jam up in steel wool in the tubes. Just put some steel wool in there and jam them with like a broomstick or something, and that will stop the tubes from leaking, at least till I could get there. Well, fine. 8 o'clock at night on New Year's Eve. Where the hell am I going to go? You're not going to find a hardware store. Where am I going to go to find a bunch of steel wool? Well, I figured that out. There's a grocery store, big chain around the corner, a couple blocks away. So I went there. They don't have steel wool. Well, you know what they did have? SOS pads. Same thing. I bought a whole shopping cart full of SOS pads. That's what I bought. And I also bought a bottle of champagne. So I stuffed those things in there. I was able to stop the leak, but I had to nurse this thing, keep the water levels going. So I stayed there all night by myself with a bottle of champagne. That's what you do sometimes. Sometimes you have to be creative. Believe me, I got a lot of steel wool right now. I keep everything on hand. Someone has a question here. I could talk to you a little bit about real estate investing. I was investing. I bought a lot of properties, probably about 100 of them, mostly single family homes, but I bought a lot of buildings too over the years. I could talk to you about that. Interest from January 1st, 2020 through December 31st. You're right. It's going to be 0.01%. You're absolutely right. Can you clarify? Do you have to give interest unless you have 25 units or more? In the state of Illinois, Chicago is different. It's 5 units. Excuse me. But Chicago's not on the state exam, but Illinois is. So you have to pay interest if you hold security deposit, you own 25 units or more. If you're 2 or 3 flat, no, you do not have to. But one thing you have to do, you use the Chicago lease. Tamara, make sure on the first page of that lease, there's that box. It's about a third of the way down from the top. You got to put down the name of the bank where the security deposit has to be kept in a bank account, and you got to put down the name of the bank. You don't do that, $3,000 fine automatically by the city. So be careful. Make sure you know the rules. That's repair or corrective maintenance. Next is routine maintenance. You're welcome. Routine maintenance, you cut your grass, you shovel your snow, you mop your foyers, vacuum your hallways. And then we have construction. Now, construction means updating your units. Now, your bedrooms, your living room, dining room, and bedrooms doesn't take much. You put a coat of paint and you either replace the carpeting or refinish the floors. Not very expensive. Your most expensive rooms are your kitchens and bathrooms. Now, to update those, now if you have newer kitchens and bathrooms, one thing is it does add value to the property itself. That's one thing. But usually it can command a higher rent. Tenants are willing to pay more rent, a higher rent, to have a new kitchen, new bathroom in their apartment. Why? Who comes and visits them? Friends and family. What do friends and family always do? They sit in the kitchen, they sit in the bathroom. They like those rooms looking nice. So, let's go on to the next page, 322. Let's see, okay, towards the bottom of 322, the last 3 paragraphs, they talk about ADA, Americans with the Disability Act. We already covered that in chapter 14. So it's just repeating that stuff. So you can highlight, put an X by this. I already talked about anything open to the general public must be ADA accessible. There are certain buildings built after a certain date over certain units must be ADA accessible as well. On the top of page 322, they give you examples of what modifications should be allowed to be done. Remember, tenant must be allowed to make reasonable modification at the tenant's expense. The landlord can keep those modifications, or the landlord could have that tenant give the landlord money to restore it to the way it was. They could do that. Let's go on to, let's go to page 324 right now. Nope, let's go to page 325 now. Leases, yes. Highlight the next 2 paragraphs on their leases. Now, put X's by them as well. Leasing real estate. It says a lease is a contract, okay? A lease is a contract between the owner, the lessor, and the tenant, the lessee. The landlord has what's called a reversionary right to the premises, which means once the lease expires, landlord gets possession of that property back. Now, the next paragraph, I had you put an X by this one too. Statute of frauds in Illinois. Leases for more than 1 year must be in writing. If you and I have a verbal lease for 3 years, that is illegal. Under a year, it could be verbal. A year or more must be in writing. Must be in writing. Now, let's go on to The next, under leasehold estates, you got to highlight the next couple paragraphs, or only a line or two. Tenant's right to possess the real estate for the term of the lease is called a leasehold estate, which means it's for a fixed period of time. Ownership is freehold, but leasing is not, less than that. A leasehold is generally considered personal property. Now, there are different types of leases that I'm going to talk about. A couple paragraphs down where it says estate for years. Highlight, put an X by that. This you're going to see an estate exam. Now, an estate for years, the term is kind of misleading. An estate for years is a lease that can be for years, but it could also be for months. It could also be for weeks. It could be for days. It could even be for hours. What makes it an estate for years, you have a definite beginning date, definite termination date. That makes it an estate for years. Let me give you a state exam question. Now, I'm going to rent some space to you in my office. And the lease is going to start on, let's see, give me a second. I'm going to rent this space to you on October 1st. No, I'm sorry. Let's make it October 15th, 2020 at 10 a.m. to October 15th, 2020, 8 p.m. I'm going to rent this office space to you for exactly 10 hours. 10 hours now. Question to you. State exam question. Is this an estate for years? I'm going to rent this place to you, my office space, for 10 hours, October 15th, 2020, at 10 a.m. to October 15th, 2020, 8 p.m. Is this an estate for years? This is on the state exam. And most of you got it right. The answer is yes. Most of you got that right. Why is this an estate for years? Why? Even though it's only for so many hours, I have a definite beginning date, definite termination date. That makes it an estate for years. This is what they're going to give you as an example. On a state, actually, they're renting a banquet hall. They have you rent a banquet hall for a certain event. Is that an estate for years? It's only for so many hours? Yes, it is. Because I have a definite beginning date, definite termination date. Notice to terminate this. Do I have to give you a notice to terminate? No. Your termination date is 8 o'clock. Get out. Okay. Now, let's skip down to the next page. The very top. Estate from period to period. Now, estate from period to period, the most common is a month-to-month tenancy. Now, if I'm renting an apartment to you on a month-to-month basis, if I wanted to raise your rent, I need to give you 30-day notice. You're on a month-to-month. If I wanted you to vacate the premises, I need to give you 30-day notice. If you want to move out, you have to give me 30-day notice. If we're week to week, then 7-day notice. So whatever period we're on, that's how much time is required to make any changes to the agreement. And people can live in an apartment on a month-to-month for, I had them for over 20 years. They won't sign a lease. There's just certain people, they just won't do that. Periodic, next paragraph where it says, periodic tenancy after an estate for years, tenancy expires. So I want you to know this. It says on the written lease for a year. Your lease expired on August 31st. I come knocking on your door on August 31st to make sure you're out. You look, Sam, my new place isn't ready. I need to stay here for another 6 or 8 weeks. I'd be glad to pay you rent. I said, that's fine. That's okay. We create a month-to-month, or it could be a week-to-week tenancy, a periodic tenancy. A holdover tenancy. I don't want you to get mixed up. A holdover tenancy means the tenant occupies the property after the lease expires with the landlord's permission. Holdover tenancy. Do not forget that. Looks like I lost sound for about a minute. I don't know what happened. So, but it looks like I'm back. Okay. This always happens right around this time. It's the last 10, 15 minutes, always it seems like. So, holdover tenancy, tenant occupies the property after the lease expires with the landlord's permission. So make sure you remember that, because I'm going to do a couple other things I want you to know. Now, skip down a little bit where it says the following notices are required by Illinois statute. The first two bullets you can highlight, put an X by. A tenancy from year to year, 60-day notice. Tenancy from month to month, 30-day notice. Just know those two. The very next paragraph where it says estate at will, highlight, put an X by that one. Estate at will means no notice is required to make any changes. No notice is required. I want you out, you got to get out now. That's estate at will. Usually happens when someone's occupying that basement apartment, like a nephew, a cousin, or something like that. They might have a estate at will. You have enough money to stay for 3 days, that's fine. You pay me for 3 days. Then you get out after that. Notice to terminate is not required. Now, let me give you another state exam question. Okay. This is an estate at will question. I own a apartment building. All of you are tenants in my building. Now, the federal government decided to use their power of eminent domain to tear down my building to build a new highway where the building's sitting at now. So I have to go out. I got notice from them. They're going to use their power of eminent domain. I go around knocking on all the doors. I'm telling you, look, the federal government is going to use their power of eminent domain. They're going to tear down my building and build a new highway. Not quite sure when that's going to happen. Might happen in the next few weeks or maybe in the next few months. You could stay here until that happens. You're going to pay me rent while you're here. But there's going to be a day I'm going to come in and knock on the door and says, you need to get out and get out now. This building's coming down tomorrow. That's the example of what they call estate at will. They use that particular example that I just mentioned. Now, estate at sufferance. Highlight, put an X by this. Important to know. Estate at sufferance is one of the lowest estates known under the law. Estate at sufferance is this. Here's an example. You have a lease. Your lease expired on August 31st. I come knocking on a door to make sure you're out. You go, look, Sam, my new place isn't ready. It won't be ready for another 6 or 8 weeks. I like to stay here. I'm gonna stay here. I'm gonna be paying you rent. I says, no, you can't stay here. I have a new tenant that's getting ready to move in tomorrow. You need to get out and get out now. Your lease is over with. And you don't leave. You occupy the property after the lease expires without the landlord's permission. It's a step above trespassing on someone's property. Estate at sufferance. The tenant occupies the property after the lease expires without the landlord's permission. Holdover is where the tenant occupies the property after the lease expires with the landlord's permission. Know the difference between the two. Now, Let's go on to the next page near the top. Lease agreements, requirement of a valid lease. Highlight, put X by that line there. A lease is a contract. It's a form of a contract. So a lease must have all the same essential elements of any other contract. Highlight, put an X by the next 4 bullets. First of all, the tenant must have capacity to enter into a contract, legal capacity into the lease. It must be for some legal objective. I can't rent an apartment. Let's say I rent an apartment to you for you to live in. You can't turn that into a nightclub. That's illegal. We must have an offer and acceptance. Which building, which unit are we talking about? Then we must have consideration. Rent is consideration. Now, let me give you a state exam question. I expect all of you to get this particular question. A father and a 17-year-old son signed a lease. A father, this is on a state exam, all of you will see this, and a 17-year-old son signed a lease. Question is, what is the status of this lease? Is it A, valid, B, void, C, voidable, or D, unenforceable? I'm going to repeat the question because this is on the state exam. A father and a 17-year-old son signed a lease. Question is, what's the status of the lease? A, valid, B, void, C, voidable, or D, unenforceable? What's the status of that lease? So a father and a 17-year-old son signed a lease. What is the status of the lease? A, valid, B, void, C, voidable, or D, unenforceable? The answer is B, void. A minor cannot sign a lease. A minor can buy a property. A minor cannot sign a lease. No other answer but B, void. It's not voidable. It's not valid. It's not unenforceable. Void. I know this 100%, and you need to know this 100%. A minor cannot sign a lease. A void lease is, well, a void contract or void lease means you have no contract, no lease. You're missing one of the essential elements. Capable parties, legal objective, offer and acceptance, consideration. Avoidable contract is a contract that can be rescinded or revoked or voided only by the injured party, someone that was lied to, or a minor could buy property. They cannot lease. They can buy property. But it's voidable until that minor turns 18. Okay, and that void, you have no contract at all. Yeah, a minor can buy property, but they can cancel up to they turn 18. But a minor can never sign a lease under any circumstance. The answer is void, and don't even question it. That's the answer. I'm giving you the answer to that question. Okay. Now, let's see what I got next. Let me just do one more thing. Towards the bottom of 327, possession of the premises, it says the lessor, put an X by this one, as the owner of real estate, is bound by the implied covenant of quiet enjoyment, which means the landlord must provide quiet enjoyment to the tenant. And what that means is, if I'm the landlord and you're a tenant in my building, I have no right to enter your apartment except for emergency or regular scheduled inspection. See, I had to provide quiet enjoyment to you, the tenant. Now, quiet enjoyment has nothing to do with the neighbors playing loud music or the dog next door is barking or motorcycles coming up the street. That's not what I'm talking about. Quiet enjoyment. It's my building, but you rented that apartment. That's your space. I have no right to enter your apartment except for emergency, like water running from your toilet down below or a regularly scheduled inspection. That's what quiet enjoyment means. You know, landlords, there's bad tenants out there, but there are bad landlords out there too. And there are landlords just, when the people go to work, they go into their apartment, which they have no right to do, to watch TV. They make a sandwich or something like that. They might go through, who knows what they're doing. They have no right to do so. They cannot. So let's go on to this next page, 328. The third paragraph, implied warranty of habitability. I'd like you to highlight, put an X by that one. Highlight, put X by that paragraph, the next paragraph, and those bullets underneath too. Me as a landlord, you as a tenant, I have to make sure that the toilets are working, you have hot and cold running water, there's heat in the winter time. I have to make sure the garbage is picked up. I have to make sure there's no infestation of rats or roaches or things like that. The property has to be in habitable condition for the health and safety of the tenant. Now, security deposits, towards the bottom of page 328. The last three paragraphs, you got highlight, put X's by them. I talked about this before, was mentioned earlier in this chapter. I told you that the problem with the security deposit, that landlords are getting away from that, and they're charging the one-time move-in fee rather than a security deposit, so they had to deal with the interest on the security deposit, which is a big pain in the butt. And also remembers in the last paragraph, if you own more than 25, someone owns more than 25 residential units at any one time, they don't have to be in the same building. They can be spread out throughout the state of Illinois. If someone stays there for more than 6 months, they must pay interest once a year on that security deposit. Otherwise, they get fined 3 times what the security deposit is. That's why I say it's a big pain in the butt. Now, on this next page, 329, where it says improvements, highlight, put an X by that one. It says neither the landlord nor the tenant is required to make any improvements to the leased property. Now, if the tenant makes any improvements with the landlord's written permission, any improvements made to the premises become part of that real property, meaning that you get permission to make improvements, whatever you do now belongs to the landlord. Why? Anytime you add anything to real property, becomes part of that real property. Now, the next 2 paragraphs where it says accessibility, tenants with disabilities. Again, a tenant who has a disability must be allowed to make reasonable modification at the tenant's expense. And the landlord can require money to be held by the landlord, given to him by the tenant, to restore the property to the way it was, or the landlord can keep those modifications. Again, anything added to real property becomes part of the real property. Assignment and subleasing. I'd like you to highlight, put X by those 2 paragraphs. Now, assignment and subleasing. I'm going to talk about subleasing first. I rented an apartment to you, and you signed a 3-year lease. After living there for 6 months, you found out you're being relocated to another city, but you have a right to sublease the apartment now. So I'm talking about a sublease. In a sublease, the new tenant is primarily responsible for paying the rent and maintaining the apartment. But if the new tenant doesn't, you, the original tenant, are liable for the balance of that 3 years. That's a sublease. Again, I'll repeat that. I rented an apartment to you for 3 years. After living there for 6 months, you found out you're being relocated to another city. You have a right to sublease that apartment. In a sublease, the new tenant is primarily responsible for paying the rent and maintaining the unit. You as the original tenant are secondarily liable in case they don't pay. Now, a assignment of rent is this. I rented an apartment to you for 3 years. After living there for 6 months, you found out you're being relocated to another city. But you have a right to assign that lease to someone else, to a new tenant. Now, in a assignment, the new tenant only is responsible for paying the rent and maintaining the unit. If they don't pay me as a landlord, I can only go after the new tenant. Remember, I talked about assignment before, substitution of one person in place of another. That's what it is. Now, let's go on to different types of leases here on page 330. Where it says gross lease, I like it to highlight, put an X by gross lease. I want you to write down this word next to this paragraph. Write down the word apartments. Apartments. A gross lease is used with apartments. This is where the tenant pays a flat fee each and every month. The landlord is responsible for paying the taxes, the insurance, repairs, and maintenance of the property. Gross lease used with apartments. The tenant pays a flat fee each and every month. The landlord is the one that's responsible for paying taxes, insurance, repairs, and maintenance. That's a gross lease used with apartments. Now, they talk about letter of intent for commercial when someone's going to do a long-term lease on commercial property. They do a letter of intent before they draw up the lease. As long as they agree to everything in the letter of intent, the LOI, then this is going to transfer into a lease at that point, done with commercial. Now, where it says net lease, I'd like you to highlight, put an X by the next two paragraphs. You can write down commercial property, commercial property. This is called a net lease, also called a net lease, also called a triple net lease. Net, triple net lease. This is where the tenant not only pays a monthly fee every month, they pay some or maybe all of the variable expenses, including taxes and insurance and repairs and maintenance. This is called net, triple net lease. Now let's go on to the percentage lease. Like highlight, put an X by that one. I want you to write down the word retail stores next to percentage lease. Retail stores. Now in a percentage lease, this is where the tenant pays a flat fee each and every month, but a portion of their income that they get from their business is also applied towards the rent. So let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. I'm going to do a couple of these. Well, I'll do one now. I'll do one in a math review. So this is a percentage lease. Here's the problem. The rent is $2,000 a month, or 5% of gross sales over $400,000 a year. You don't pay on the first 400,000. Whichever is greater. Now, gross sales were 900,000 for the year. Question is, how much rent did the tenant pay last year? This is a percentage lease used with retail stores. The rent is $2,000 a month, or 5% of gross sales over 400,000 a year, whichever happens to be greater. Gross sales for the year was $900,000. Question is, how much rent did the tenant pay last year? If you want to try to figure that out, I'll give you a moment to figure it out, and then I'm going to show you how to solve this problem. A couple steps to it, but I'll show it to you. I'd like you to try to figure it out. I got one similar to this, but I'm going to save it for Monday too. The other one on Monday will be a little bit tougher. So I'd like you to try this out, because that's really how you understand these problems. Go ahead and try it out, and then I'm going to show you exactly how to solve these. The other one's a little bit tougher, but I'm going to save that one for Monday, I think. All right, so let me show you. Most of you got it right. You did a very good job. Well, let me show you. Not enough you tried, but maybe you're still working on it. I don't know. Okay. There's two steps to it. So the rent's $2,000 a month. $2,000 times 12 months comes out to $24,000. Now, or it's going to be 5% of gross sales over 400,000. The first 400,000 is exempt. Gross sales was 900,000. We have 4,000 that's exempt, which leaves us $500,000. Times 5% will give me $25,000. 25 is greater than 24. So how much rent did they pay? $25,000. Now, let me tell you how this lease works. Each and every month, the tenant's paying the owner or the manager $2,000 a month. They collected $24,000. They look at their books, they should have paid $25,000. So at the end of the year, the tenant writes out a check for an additional $1,000. That's how this one works. Now, do you think this type of a lease is common? Yes, it's very, very common. Very common. Every major shopping mall in this country, they're all on a percentage lease. Now, let's take, for example, Woodfield Mall over there in Schaumburg. You have those anchor stores. The anchor stores, well, Sears, I don't even think it's there anymore, but Macy is there, Nordstrom's. The anchor stores pay a flat fee, but there's over another 270 stores out there, 75 stores in that shopping mall. And every single one of them is on a percentage lease. Every single one of them is on a percentage lease. And the reason why they have this type of a lease, well, I'm going to rent so many square feet for you, for your business, to you, for your business. But if you're doing really well in your business, I get some of the action. Why? it's going to cost me more money to run this mall for getting cleaning up and dumpsters and taking care of the parking lot and security and things like that. Now, the amount that's deductible, it's different for every store. Say it's a jewelry store, they're going to have a much higher deductible than the store that's selling pretzels or whatever it might be. But very, very common to have this type of a lease with all your major shopping centers in this country. Okay. All right, let's get back to our textbook. Let's talk about a variable lease. So highlight, put X by the top of this page 331. Now, a variable lease is also called a step-up lease, also called a graduated lease, and it's quite often called a escalator lease. A lot of times they use that on a state exam. This is done for commercial property. And let me clear this out, give you an example. Now, I'm going to rent some commercial space to you, and you're going to sign a 10-year lease with me. Now, it's not fair to me as a landlord that your rent's going to start here on the bottom and stay at the same level for the next 10 years. That's not fair to me. But it's not fair to you as a tenant that where the rent should be up here in 10 years from now, that your rent's going to be at that level. So here's what we do. The first year, it's at this level down here. Then we have a slight increase and it stays at this level for the next year. Every year, we have a slight increase over the term of that lease. And that's why it kind of looks like steps. That's why you get they call it a step-up lease, or it looks like an escalator. That's why they call it an escalator. So this is called a graduated lease, a step-up lease, also called a variable lease. It has all these different names. So variable lease, step-up lease, graduated lease, escalator lease. It's really hard to predict what the rent's going to be in 10 years from now. So we just kind of go by what the average increase has been in the last few years, and you kind of go with that. That's what you have to do. It might benefit the tenant. It might be bad for the tenant. Just don't know. So that's what we do. Now, oil and gas leases. No, I left one out. Ground lease. Highlight, put an X by that one. Usually you get a question on a ground lease. Let me explain what a ground lease is. A ground lease is, I own some vacant land, and I lease my land to you. I sign a long-term lease. You're going to rent the land from me. You will build a building on my land for your business, and when the lease expires, whatever you build on there now belongs to me. Again, as I said before, anytime you add anything to real property, it becomes part of the real property. That's what a ground lease is. Now, do you think ground leases are common? Yes, they are. Very, very common. Let me give you a couple examples of ground leases. Let's take Walgreens drugstore. Walgreens has 8,400 stores in this country. I would say 98% of all the Walgreens in this country are built on a ground lease. Now, Walgreens used to do a 20-year with option for another 20 years, but they changed a couple of years ago. They're doing 25 years with option for another 25 years. So they own a couple of the stores, but 98% of them, they're in a ground lease. And the reason why they do that, if you look at the locations of these 8,400 stores, they're at these major intersections. Think of how many billions of dollars that Walgreens will have tied up in real estate. They're not in the real estate business, they're in the drug business. And it's a tax write-off. They're paying rent, they write off the depreciation, it's all a tax write-off. You ever see a Walgreens sitting in a location for 25 years and all of a sudden it shuts down and 3 blocks away there's a new Walgreens? because they basically follow their people, which are the prescription people. CVS does the exact same thing. I believe CVS has about 5,500 stores, and they do a ground lease on 97% of them. They only own 3% of the land that their stores are on, and that's another reason for that. Someone else on a big, big scale that does ground leases will be McDonald's. Now, people think of McDonald's as being a fast food restaurant. They make their money from fast food. No, they don't. A very small percent of their income ever comes from fast food. McDonald's is one of the biggest landlords there is in this country. They own land in just about every single city in this country. All the McDonald's restaurants, say you want to open up a McDonald's franchise. Well, you got to put up a couple $1 million up in cash that they hold on, and it could take years till they find a location for you. Then they find a location. Then what they do, they will buy the land where the restaurant's going to be at. So they're going to lease it out to you, lease that land out to you. Now you had to find an architect to design the restaurant. Well, guess who owns the architect firm? McDonald's does. Now you need a construction company to build the restaurant. Guess who owns the construction company? McDonald's. Now you need to buy all your supplies. Guess who owns all the supplies? McDonald's. Let's say McDonald's, here's what they do. They own everything, just about everything, not everything, but just about everything. And the hamburgers and all that fast food is only a small percent. They're big landlords. Oh, by the way, McDonald's owns most of the shopping centers in this country. They own the land, at least, in most of the shopping centers in this country. And they own a lot of the shopping centers outright. Here's what McDonald's does. I have no idea how many coffee cups they sell, how many cups of coffee they sell a week, but they will go to a company that makes coffee cups. And they says, we're going to give you a contract, and you're going to make all our coffee cups for our restaurants, whatever it might be, $1 million a week or 5 million. I don't know what they do. And the guy gets real excited. Okay, we'll give you some time to start finding a place and gearing up and getting the equipment, but that's the contract they're going to write. Oh, by the way, they tell them, we own half the business. We're not going to invest anything into your business, but we're going to own half of it. Guy says, why should I give you half my business? Well, if you don't, we're going to go to your competitors. We're going to give our contract to that person. We'll own half that business. So it's up to you. What do you want to do? And so that's what they do with everything, except for somehow they got some agreement with the food, like the fish or the burgers. They're hold harmless on it. Like if someone gets sick and the food, McDonald's can't be sued. It has to go to the food purveyors, and that's somehow in the contract. There's 100 lawsuits filed every single day against McDonald's. 100 lawsuits every single day. So believe me, they got a bunch of lawyers working on for them all the time. But that's where they make their money. There's a movie, I didn't see the movie. It's called Founder. I forgot the guy that's in it, but it talks about how that Ray Kroc, how he started off and everything else, and he got into real estate. They're the biggest landowners ever. So, Rebecca, you're asking me about Dick Portillo. Yeah, let me tell you something. I used to like Portillo's. I don't go there anymore. It seems like when they decide to go franchise and they sell, something happened with their gravy. With their beef gravy, it's kind of oily now. It wasn't bad. I don't like it anymore. It used to be really, really good, and I used to love going there. It's not as good. You're right, Carlos. It's not as good since they went into going franchise and they sold out. So I tell you, it's been years since I've been there. They whenever they converted, I went there once, didn't like it, and guess what? I don't know if they've gotten any better, but I don't even go there. Someone just told me that Grossinger family owns, I guess that's Grossinger car dealership over there too, I guess, out there in Lincolnwood, owns Lincolnwood Mall with a 100-year lease. It might be. That mall's in a lot of trouble right now too. So you get more. I hate going there because the food court. There's like 4 stores left over there. A lot of stores are shutting down over there. The quality sucks. Yeah, it is. You're talking about that Portillo's. Yeah, I know. You know what? I still like Illuminati's. I used to go out to the one in Lincolnwood on Lincoln Avenue. They have one by my house way out here. Um, I think it's good. I like going to the original one. That's the I think when they're in there. Um, I have a cousin who lives in California. He comes to Chicago about once a year and he hits all the restaurants. First thing he asks, is it the same owner? Because you know what? Sometimes these owners, what they do is they go into processed foods and cheaper cuts of meat and stuff. There used to be a really good restaurant I used to go to on Oakton and Milwaukee, Italian restaurant. It was called at Rossini's, I believe it was. To be very good. The guy sold it, and the guy went to cheaper cuts of meats, frozen pasta. It wasn't the same. That's why Sabatino's over there in Irving Park shut down. The owners there, Enzo and Angelo, the children didn't want it. He didn't want his name to go get run down in a, because he built up that reputation for years. And he says, forget it. I'm just going to shut it down. So that's why Sabatino's is not there. Just go a few blocks away to La Villa over on Pulaski. So that's what a ground lease is. Let's talk about oil and gas leases. Now, um, here's something. A lot of people don't know this. Most of the major oil companies have leased out millions and millions and millions of acres of land all throughout Texas, Oklahoma, other states, Kansas, not so they could drill for oil. What they do is they have long-term leases. They're not paying very much on the leases. They're like 30-year leases. But if they do drill, they're going to give the farmer or the rancher a part of the profit. So in the meantime, the farmers are growing their crops or they're grazing their cattle there. But mostly why they leased out these millions and millions of acres of land, it's not to drill for oil, it's to keep other companies from drilling, keep the prices up. That's a fact. In the state of Oklahoma, about 1/3 of the entire state of Oklahoma is Native American reservation. A lot of people don't know that, but that's a fact. Now, the United States government made a treaty with the Native Americans. If they discover any oil on the reservation, they can only sell to one person, the United States government, at $2.50 a barrel. $2.50 a barrel. And you know what they say? Look, the United States has broken thousands of treaties with the Native Americans. This says, why don't we just get this one and make it fair? The United States said, no, they won't. So guess what? They're not drilling for oil. There's a lot of oil in this country. Actually, we have enough oil in this country. We can produce enough oil with Alaska and everything to not depend on oil from other countries, but we don't. For example, most of the oil from Alaska, I think it's about 90% of the oil that they drill in Alaska. Guess where that goes? Mostly Asia, especially Japan. Why they make a lot more money? I don't know if anyone's familiar with being in Europe. I've been to Europe many times going there for decades. And you know what they pay for gasoline? They call it petrol. What they pay for petrol out there? It's about $4.50 a liter. A liter now. There's like approximately 4 liters in a gallon. So they're paying about $18 a gallon for gas. That's why they got so many small cars. I mean, Canada's a little bit cheaper. I think Canada was it's still on liters, but it's about $2 a liter. So, you know what country we get most of our oil from that we import? Number one country we import our oil from. People don't know this. It's Canada. 26% of all the oil we import comes from Canada. It's a heavy oil used for diesel and for heating homes and stuff, mostly along the northeastern seaboard. But that's what it is. They just don't want other people drilling for it. A lot of oil in this country, but they make more money selling it to Europe and Asia. So lease with an option to purchase. This is when someone will lease a property and sometime later buy it out, and they get credit for every time they make a rent on this one, that they paid a rent. But you don't see that happening now, not with the low interest rates. So, question. One day, we're not in class, we have to talk about oil. You know what? I know a lot about oil. I know a lot. I got to tell you something. I know that, remember when they had, I don't know if I talked about this, when they had the oil spill, the Exxon Valdez over in the Puget Sound in Alaska? When that oil spilled out there, and about 5 years ago in the Gulf of Mexico, there was a big oil spill by BP as well. Did you know that they could have cleaned up and saved all those seals and birds and wildlife out in the ocean? They could have saved them, but they didn't. The politicians stopped companies from containing the oil. They could have contained it. They stopped it because the Alaskans did not want to work. They did not want to work because if they destroy the fishing industry, then the federal government has to pay them for so many years till it comes back, like 20 years. They did the same thing in Louisiana about 5 years ago. The politicians stopped them from cleaning the oil. I know a guy that had 50 boats, 50 of them, has a way of containing the oil where it doesn't spread out. But, he was on his way there and they'd send him right back. We don't need you. Politicians did that. Yeah, it's hard to find information. You got to do a lot of good research and you find out. You got to know people. You know about politics, I'm telling you. If you ever know any politicians, you ever talk to a politician and know what goes on with our government, I'm telling you, your stomach would turn. And guess what? The general population of the United States government, we don't even know 1% of what the federal government's doing. We don't even know 1%. The congressmen, they barely know 10% of what the government's doing. Sales leaseback, I talked about that before. Sales leaseback is I own a factory, I lease it out, I sell it to you, but I will lease it back from you. Sales leaseback, the owner becomes a tenant or the lessee, the investor becomes the landlord or the lessor. That's a sales leaseback. Yeah, Alberto, you say you work for Chicago Park District in the city of Chicago. Yeah, I know a lot of politicians. I know a lot of them. I mean, pretty well and stuff like that. I mean, what I'm trying to get from them is I'm trying to get that license plate from this one politician. I told him I need a license plate. The one that says it says Illinois. It's an Illinois state senator. Illinois state senator aide. This way I can park wherever I want. They never get told they can park in a handicap zone. They won't get told. I was with his wife. I said I need to tell your husband I need to get that plate for my car. She goes, what are you talking about? She didn't even know. I go, you got a different plate on your car and your husband's car, right? You ever notice your husband parks wherever he wants and he never gets told or ever get a ticket? Well, yeah. Do you know why? It's because your plate. Tell your husband to get me one of those. That's what I need. She didn't even know. So let's go on to breach of a lease. Now it says if a tenant defaults on the payment of rent, the landlord has two options. I only want you to highlight put X by the first bullet. They serve a 5-day notice. The 5-day notice says pay or quit. Pay me within 5 days or get out. They don't get out. Now you have to go through the courts and then you have to have them evicted. That could be a lengthy process. That next paragraph where it says Landlord's remedies, actual eviction. Highlight, put an X by that one. When a tenant breaches the lease or improperly retains the leased premises, the landlord may regain possession through the legal process known as actual eviction. Now, what happens, I highlight the next couple paragraphs, or next 3 paragraphs. It says, when a court issues a judgment for possession to the landlord, the tenant must vacate the premises. If they don't leave, then it's going to be enforced by the courts. The next paragraph, in Illinois, a landlord seeking actual eviction of a tenant must file an action called forcible entry and detainer. That's what the courts, that's what the landlords must file with the courts. And then what happens, the deputies are the ones that carry out the orders. So if they rule in favor of the landlord, then possession for judgment for possession, and that's all carried out by the Cook County deputies or the county deputies. Let's see, page 333, about third paragraph down, 2-line paragraph. Illinois landlords have no right to self-help. Illinois does not allow landlords to have for self-help. Meaning a landlord, if a tenant's not paying rent, the landlord can't go in there and shut off the electricity, change the locks, remove the doors. Landlords do stuff like this. Tenants have rights, but most tenants don't even know what their rights are. Now, this next paragraph, tenants' remedies, this is called constructive eviction. Got highlight, put an X by that. What if the landlord breaches the lease? I rented an apartment to you. You signed a 3-year lease with me starting in June. You find out later, starting in September, October, November, December, I have no heat in this building. You cannot live in the Chicagoland area without heat. Excuse me. You're going to get sick. Your family's going to get sick, but you just can't move out. If you just moved out, you are responsible for paying the rent for the balance of that 3 years. If I don't maintain a property, it's not habitable. If I breach the lease, then you, as the tenant, you have to file constructive eviction. Once you file constructive eviction, then you can move. Then you're not responsible for paying the rent. Civil rights laws, a landlord cannot discriminate against any of the protected classes, cannot do that whatsoever. Lead-based paint, remember I mentioned that before, anything built before 1978, tenant must get a lead-based paint pamphlet and the lead-based paint disclosure form. And you as an agent, you need to know about this, so you hand them out, they have to be signed and all that stuff. If the landlord has any knowledge, if the tenant wants to, at the tenant's own expense, they could go and have it tested for any lead on there. And I think, yes, that's the end of this chapter 15.